The man scoffed inwardly, finding it almost amusing that the escape plan had failed so easily. To him, it was a clear sign of the group's incompetence. The leader spoke with authority, emphasizing that rules must be followed, and mistakes deserved punishment. His commanding tone left everyone silent and compliant as he led the group through a series of caverns. The air grew heavier as they crossed a raging underground river and eventually arrived at a damp, cavernous space. In the corner of the room, the group saw those who had attempted to escape the previous night. All of them were bound and gagged, their faces filled with despair. When they saw the leader, their struggles became frantic, but the cloth in their mouths muffled their cries. The leader showed no sympathy. With a simple gesture, he caused the smooth cavern floor to open, revealing a dark, ominous hole. Without hesitation, the bound individuals were cast into the opening. Their muffled screams and the horrific sound of flesh tearing echoed in the cavern. The terrifying sight left the onlookers trembling. The leader demanded that everyone step closer to witness the grim fate awaiting those who dared defy him. Though fear gripped them, no one dared to disobey, and they cautiously approached the edge. Peering into the pit, they could see nothing but darkness at first. Gradually, some details emerged. A black cauldron with strange, twisted talismans on its rim. The air was thick with the nauseating stench of blood. Whatever lay within the cauldron moved unnaturally, but it was impossible to discern its form clearly. For one observer, the gruesome sight was deeply unsettling. Though he reminded himself that this world was just a hallucination, a creeping sense of dread persisted. His thoughts were interrupted when something shot out of the hole with startling speed. A dark, writhing mass coiled around one of the disciples and yanked them into the pit. The group recoiled in terror, pressing themselves against the walls of the cavern. They might have fled if not for the leader's stern presence. Those who had seen the creature up close were frozen in shock. It was a black, fleshy mass with slimy skin and clusters of tentacles. Its unnatural appearance confirmed it was unlike anything from the ordinary world. The observer closest to the pit was struck with an overwhelming thought. What if this terrifying world was not just a hallucination, but real? His body trembled as he considered the possibility that the danger was genuine. Trying to regain control, he took deep breaths and recalled coping techniques he had learned. He reminded himself that everything he was seeing was a product of his mind and not real. Despite the vivid horror, he resolved to maintain his composure. Determined to face the situation, he steeled himself, refusing to let fear consume him. Deep down, he clung to the belief that he could overcome this nightmare and hold on to the hope waiting for him outside of it. The leader spoke sternly, ensuring that fear and discipline ruled the atmosphere. His voice was sharp, warning his disciples to remember the punishment they had witnessed and never harbor disobedient thoughts. His presence was intimidating as he paced in front of them, his sharp eyes scanning each face. He emphasized that assisting him in his quest was a privilege and a great honor. He promised rewards to those who contributed, but made it clear that betrayal would lead to severe consequences. His words sent chills through the group, their fear evident in their expressions. He stopped in front of a young man whose demeanor stood out from the others. The leader's intense gaze fixed on him, but the young man did not flinch, reminding himself that this was all an illusion. The leader raised his hand, creating a tense moment. However, instead of punishing the young man, he patted his head, softening the atmosphere. The leader acknowledged the young man's decision to stay when others had tried to escape. Although he hadn't reported the incident, his loyalty was praised. Then, the leader announced that the young man would no longer work in the preparation area, but would become his official disciple. This sudden promotion surprised the young man, but he quickly realized it was likely due to the recent loss of helpers. The leader declared that, as an official disciple, he would now have a Taoist name, assigning him the title previously held by someone who had met a grim fate. The young man found the name ominous, but stayed silent. The other disciples looked on with envy, knowing that becoming an official disciple meant survival. To solidify his loyalty, the leader offered the young man a reward. From a gourd, he poured out 5 dark pills and placed them in the young man's hand. The leader described the pills as divine, claiming they could extend life by 10 years and temporarily grant great strength. However, the young man couldn't shake the feeling that the pills might have been made using unethical means. His suspicion deepened when one of the pills seemed to change shape momentarily, as if something were struggling inside it. The unsettling thought pushed him to remind himself again that everything was part of a hallucination. Frustrated, he physically shook himself out of his thoughts, determined not to be consumed by the strange illusions. Meanwhile, the leader ignored the young man's reaction and turned to the rest of the disciples, reminding them of the rewards for loyalty and the consequences of defiance. His words left the group in deep thought, their fear and desire for survival battling within them. Satisfied with the effect of his speech, the leader dismissed the disciples, instructing them to return to their work. The young man, now an official disciple, gained new privileges, including a Taoist robe and his own small cave. Despite these changes, the young man cared little for the hallucination's events. He focused instead on the objects now in his possession, a jade pendant and the strange pills, both lying on a pristine white bedsheet. His thoughts raced as he considered their significance and what he might do next. The man found himself staring at the items he had brought out, both the pills and the jade pendant. The realization left him conflicted, as it raised questions he had been avoiding. If these items existed in the real world, did that mean the strange events he had experienced were not hallucinations, but real? He had always followed the doctor's advice, treating everything from that place as imaginary. Yet, holding these objects in his hands made him doubt his understanding. How could something from a hallucination become tangible? What dangers could these things bring into his life? His mind raced with memories of the horrors he had witnessed. He remembered the gruesome fate of the unfortunate disciple turned into paste for pills, and the terrifying scene of another being devoured by a monstrous creature. These thoughts made his breathing quicken, and frustration boiled within him. Feeling overwhelmed, he vented his emotions by scratching his head, trying to clear his thoughts. After calming down, he realized he needed to make a decision. Whether the events were real or not, he decided to act as if everything was genuine. This way, he could protect himself if it turned out to be real, and there would be no harm if it was all in his imagination. Before making further plans, he decided to test the authenticity and potential value of the items he had. He picked up one of the pills between his fingers, but hesitated. The risk of testing it on himself was too high. His eyes wandered to the patients outside, enjoying the sunlight. After an internal struggle, he placed the pill back on the table. Those patients were just as unfortunate as him, and he couldn't bring himself to use them as test subjects. He resolved to find a better way to test the pill later. His focus then shifted to the jade pendant. Compared to the pills, it seemed less dangerous and easier to deal with. He felt determined to uncover its purpose and value. At that moment, a woman entered the room, her tone filled with irritation. She scolded him, demanding to know why he had summoned her so urgently. She even jokingly threatened him, shaking her small fist. The man responded calmly, explaining that he had no choice but to ask for her help. He reminded her that his circumstances didn't allow him to leave the facility on his own. As he spoke, he walked to the door and closed it. Then, to ensure privacy, he drew the curtains. The atmosphere grew serious as he prepared to reveal his thoughts and plans, hoping she could assist him in making sense of the strange and unsettling situation he was facing. The man's actions startled the woman, and she quickly stepped back, worried about being overheard. She reminded him that the nurse station could listen in on their conversation. Just as she spoke, laughter erupted from the room's speakers, with a voice assuring them that they weren't actually listening. Frustrated, the man yelled at the speakers, telling the nurses to focus on their duties instead of being nosy. He then grabbed the woman's hand and led her to a quieter corner of the room. From his pocket, he took out the jade pendant and placed it in her hand. Leaning in close, he whispered something that left her wide-eyed with disbelief. She tried to express her shock, but he quickly covered her mouth. Their eyes met, and he pleaded with her for help, explaining that no one else trusted him, not even his family. He insisted he wasn't crazy, and begged her to believe him. After a moment, the woman nodded hesitantly, clearly concerned. As she left, she glanced back at him several times, her eyes filled with worry about his mental state. Watching her go, the man felt a mix of emotions. He no longer cared about what others thought, but her opinion mattered deeply to him. Days passed slowly, and his anxiety grew. During this time, he experienced another brief hallucination, but snapped out of it quickly. He feared missing her visit and stayed on edge, waiting for her return. Finally, after several days, a nurse cheerfully announced that his visitor had arrived. He bolted out of his bed and rushed to the hospital garden, where they reunited with a joyful embrace. The woman leaned in close and whispered that the jade pendant was real, confirming his suspicions. Overwhelmed with relief, He exclaimed loudly, declaring that he wasn't sick. He hugged her tightly and even twirled her in the air, laughing in excitement. As they calmed down, they sat by a flower bed to talk. Concerned, he asked if his request for her help had disrupted her life or studies, but she avoided answering directly. Instead, she revealed the pendant's value, stretching out 4 fingers to signal the amount. When he guessed incorrectly, she corrected him. 400, 0, 0, 0. She believed it was likely worth even more if they found the right buyer. The man was amazed. The amount was enough to cover his medical expenses for years, and still leave some left over. Teasing her, he joked about her becoming wealthy. She blushed slightly, but her worry remained evident. She asked him if using the pendant might harm him. He brushed off her concerns, insisting he was fine, and joking about extending his treatment to make the most of the situation. Her tone grew serious as she made him promise not to neglect his treatment or medications, warning she wouldn't help him otherwise. Touched by her concern, he agreed, and she smiled, playfully patting his head. Their conversation was interrupted when a group of staff members rushed past, armed with riot forks. Curious, the man stopped one of them to ask about the commotion. He was told to stay in his ward and report if he saw another patient who had apparently stopped taking his medication and escaped. The staff member hurried off, leaving the man deep in thought.